Welcome to this lesson, which is an overview of some of the causes of the American Revolution. Let's start off by defining what this means. There are several events that actually spurred the start of the American Revolution. It was not the result of one solitary act, but instead a series of events that built up tension between the colonists and Great Britain, ultimately leading to war. There are numerous causes as well as numerous effects of the American Revolution. Understanding all of them can provide a window into what life was like at the time. So why does this matter? Since no one event was the catalyst for the American Revolution, it's worthwhile to understand how tensions were building in the years leading up to the war and how life on one side of the Atlantic was so different from the other. One of the primary causes of the American Revolution was the French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War. This was the first in a series of events that had colonists really focused on independence, and it's known as the French and Indian War. This war lasted for 7 years and was fought between the British and the French. The source of the conflict was about claims to territory in what was known as the Ohio River Valley. And you can really see how, not only in this lesson, but in other lessons, how this influenced Great Britain's role in arguing with the colonists and trying to set up structure and rules. The French and Indian War happened between 1754 and 1763. The source of the conflict was about claims to territory in what was known as the Ohio River Valley, and the British were successful in this war. The British then demanded that the French get out of North America entirely, and taxing colonists served as a way for the British to regain some of the financial losses associated with the war. So this leads into our second cause of the American Revolution, and that were laws and acts that were handed down from Britain. So Britain really began to increase the regulations over the colonies by putting forth legislation designed to guide their new land. Although the colonists needed trade from other countries in order to meet basic needs, the British made it even more expensive to import these items by levying taxes on them. The first of these is known as the Sugar Act, and it was involved increasing duties on sugar that was being brought into the colonies at the time. The colonies were heavily reliant on sugar and other items that were coming in from other countries as a part of their trading. And the Sugar Act was passed in 1764. Colonists were forbidden from making their own currency as a result of the 1764 Currency Act, and tension began to mount as the British put forth the 1765 Quartering Act. This required that colonists were responsible for housing and feeding British soldiers if it became necessary. And this was followed by the Stamp Act the same year, which required colonists to pay taxes on printed documents and other goods. And this last one, the Stamp Act, was deemed particularly egregious by colonists who rebelled and made it their goal to terrorize tax collectors for the British. So this is really outlining some of the tension that's really building up as each one of these acts is coming out. There were also incidents of violence that really contributed towards the colonists feeling like they weren't being heard by the British. One of these was the Boston Massacre, which happened on March 5th in 1770. It is still known as one of the most gruesome events associated with the American Revolution. 4 individuals were killed in Boston when the British fired off shots into an angry mob of people. And Boston was really a hotbed for discussing these issues, but also critical events that spurred the American Revolution. The Boston Tea Party, which happened on December 16th of 1773, part of the reason that Boston was so important for these events leading up was because many goods were delivered to the harbor that was located there. On this particular event, an angry group known as the Sons of Liberty boarded a British vessel in the harbor and dumped all of the tea overboard as a protest against the tea tax. And obviously this only further angered the British, who created more policies known as the Intolerable Acts. As you can imagine, the series of events that were unfolding demonstrated a lot of critical tension between the two parties, and the colonists really felt like their issues were not being heard by the British at all, which is why they felt like they needed to resort to violence or other really obvious forms of protest against what they perceived to be oppressive rule from the British. And then finally, there were other less violent ways simply of communicating intellectually about the issues that the colonists felt they had in common. And this idea of congregating together, discussing these key issues, formulating whether there could be a universal response to this. Some of examples of that are the Continental Congress and the pamphlet known as Common Sense. Feeling that war was on the horizon, the Continental Congress was put together to generate consensus about how to handle it, and this involved sending representatives from the various colonies together to meet and discuss some of the issues and try to formulate a universal response. And as you'll learn in one of the future lessons associated with this unit, not everybody was on the same page in the First Continental Congress about the best way to respond. Another way that ideas and conceptualizing about this oppression occurred has to do with a pamphlet known as Common Sense. It was written by Thomas Paine, and it really gained traction to support an overthrow of the British hierarchy. So this idea of publications contributing towards shared knowledge is really interesting and important for the American Revolution. As you can see, there are many events that led to the American Revolution. Frustrated with the initial policies designed to make them fall in line with British rule, colonists became increasingly aggravated by the intolerable treatment forced on them by the British and their inability to be able to live as a free people. With growing recognition from leaders and the public, it was clear that revolution was on the verge of erupting. Their attempts to spread knowledge about common consensus over the oppression, as well as the fact that the British were not hearing them and that it was being taken to the level of major violent events, all contributed to the causes of the American Revolution.